benefits of process automation in digital transformation. I'm Justin Short, I'm the Chief Operating Officer and one of the co-founders of Synergi. And I've worked in business intelligence, automation, collaboration and cloud solutions now for over 30 years, and based out of the northeast of England. But outside of work, two of my main hobbies, motorcycling and music, not always at the same time. I'm also a Nintex VTE, which is a weird title, but it's basically a technical evangelist, and I've been invited here by Nintex to speak on their behalf today. So Nintex simply are automation specialists, and their mission is to improve the way that people work through process automation and process management. And they've been doing this at the head of the field for a couple of decades, and Synergi is very proud to be a Nintex Premier Partner. Nintex is the world's largest privately held software vendor for process automation, and that's really illustrated by the fact that they've got over 10,000 customers globally, which include over 50% of the Fortune 500 and many of the FTSE 250 amongst their customer base. And one of the things that I guess for Synergi really stands out with Nintex is the role that the partners and their customer community have played in creating a really dynamic and vibrant ecosystem around the Nintex technologies. As you can see, those customers include many of the world's leading brands, and some of these customers are running thousands of processes, the largest maybe tens of thousands of processes on that platform. So Nintex can handle not only many of these complex process scenarios, but it's also used by organisations of all shapes and sizes, from small to medium businesses right through to global enterprise. Synergi was built on a vision to be a leading cloud solutions provider in the UK. And today we've got over 50 staff that specialise in helping organisations right the way across the country to transform the way that they work. And the team's really focused on creating long-term partnerships with our customers that drive success through digital change. And we're supported by our class-leading technologies and our partners like Nintex. So I'm very conscious that in today's session I'm standing between yourselves and lunch, which is never a good place to be. So we're going to quickly walk through these 6 areas in the session, and as we were saying, Ben was saying, we'll hopefully have a chance to do a few questions and answers. But the session today is going to start with a look at the current process landscape and some of the challenges that are likely facing all of us. From there, we're going to start to look at the benefits of planning and understanding and mapping our processes before leading through into looking at the anatomy of what process automation solutions look like, some of the key trends in the tools, and how they can really help our adoption. We'll then move to think about the ways in which we can start to optimize processes. And finally, we'll bring all of that together in terms of how we fully orchestrate our business processes. So to begin with, we're going to start by looking at the landscape, the view of what's happening across processes. And for this, I'd really like you to think about your own organisations and ponder perhaps a few initial questions to get us thinking. How much of your working week is spent on manual tasks that could be automated? I think for many of us, the feeling is probably quite a bit. Are there particular departments in the organisation that really stand out? Are there specific processes that you encounter or work closely with that you just feel are broken? Have you got faith in your organisation's ability to actually fix those broken processes? For many, that is quite a tricky question. And is the organisation currently undertaking initiatives to improve processes? These are all, interestingly, amongst questions that Nintex have asked a global audience of customers throughout 2021. And the results paint a picture of the world's organisations' continued struggle with broken processes, made probably a lot worse through the pandemic, and a very high demand for remote and hybrid working. But according to the survey, the automation investments that organisations have made, actually 77% of organisations have said that they've invested more than 25% more in automation over the course of the pandemic, and many of those have invested up to a quarter more in terms of investment. So understanding where these breakdowns in processes are happening really helps us to see opportunities for how we can improve employee productivity and retention and ultimately bottom line. So what does this mean to us? Well, it means that almost a third of employees feel that they're prevented from being as productive as they could be. We're seeing particularly HR, IT, shared services often are hotspots. Dispersed workforces. Now, I'm a 70s child, so I managed to break quite a lot of slinkies along the way. But here we're portraying what we think are the top 10 broken processes, highlighted by the results that have come through. And it's not really a surprise that we're seeing some COVID-specific processes in here, things like health checks, working from home, those sorts of things. But employee admin, still very much top of the tree on the left-hand side, closely followed by employee onboarding. And it's really interesting that employee onboarding, so classic kind of starter, leaver, mover requests, combined with things like supplier onboarding, vendor onboarding, customer onboarding, we see as Synergi as some of the most common processes that we're helping to automate for customers as a team. And what's also really interesting about the results is that they're highlighting this need for improvement right the way across the automation landscape, not just the digitization of workflow itself. Processes need to be better mapped, better understood, they need to be better documented, and better automated, as well as being better optimized. And the last one, the optimization piece, can be tricky. Even if we've partially automated a process, tracking and monitoring how well it's actually performing to make the improvements can be pretty difficult, but we're going to come back to that. We're increasingly recognizing that all four of these areas, these key process elements, are key success factors. So ineffective and manual or paper-based processes are definitely impacting on productivity, especially when most employees are remote, and at least many of us are for a lot of the time at the moment. New processes that have been put into place just aren't as effective as they could be, often due to a number of reasons, which we'll look at, but often it's conflicting processes or disconnected systems. And almost 2/3 are saying that there's just not really an initiative to drive beyond having paper in their organization, or that there's not really a strategy or an approach for mapping or documenting the processes that are there. So if this is sounding like a familiar scenario, then it's really important that we start to think about the impact that this has for us as organizations, because many customers that we work with really start to recognize the significant impact that processes can have on their productivity. And this is highlighted by the fact that more than half of the world's employees are wasting 25% of their time on manual processes. Now, if you think around that, it's about 10 hours a week in a 40-hour working week. Think of just what could be gained in that time in terms of productivity. Employees that work in finance, technology, insurance, typically are also very much more likely to recognise their company's processes, and they feel that they're probably at the top end of recognising that lack of productivity from the results. But it's actually across a range of different sectors, and the efficiency increases and productivity gains that we could get if they were properly automated are immense, and employees can spend this time on much more high-value work and much more profitably. So then finally, the work and the company culture piece are crucial to maintaining productivity. And what we're seeing is that the pandemic's highlighted for many of us that vital intangible areas of the business, such as culture, are really, really important. So trusting that the organisation can support you and your collective and personal goals is really key to this, and it includes the ability to optimise these processes. So where we've got optimisation that's lacking, it's creating frustration and disengagement in employees that has a danger of spreading to other people. So the survey results that more employees than ever believe that the time that they're looking at is influenced by the effect that these broken processes have. And so we can really start to look at addressing these challenges and realizing the true benefits of automation in our own transformation journeys. So earlier on, we were thinking about the context of the process challenges across mapping, documentation, the automation, and the optimization of our processes. Let's begin by looking at the first two of these and considering how we map, document, and understand our business processes. Ultimately, I guess what we're looking to develop here is a process culture right across the organization, a process center of excellence. Why do we want to do that? Well, definitely because of productivity and the culture piece we just talked about, but also because of engagement. Successful process cultures thrive on engagement, on feedback, and on input from the whole organization. But as we start to discover and map out processes, often what we start to see are some of the challenges that come up in that. On top of the list, interestingly here, is multiple and conflicting processes. This is kind of a classic, and I guess we've all seen this, but John's got a Visio diagram that he's spent many weeks perfecting. Mary's got a Word document in the drawer that's been the way the process has been done for the last 5 years, and that's not going to change. You know, it's confusing for employees to have that scenario. Workflow systems don't connect. You know, you map in one tool, you digitize forms in another, you've got workflow, you've got robotic processes, you know, there's a mishmash of automation pieces. The documentation is not effective. Rectangles and diamonds and things look really pretty on a Visio diagram, but it's often pretty hard to read and understand and pretty difficult to follow. Nobody seems to be updating our processes. I think this is one of the things that most people align with, that, you know, we create these great process maps, but they're a point in time. You know, they're not a living, breathing recognition, and processes are constantly evolving, constantly changing. Process in place isn't relevant to the tasks that we actually do. And this, again, is the people that are actually delivering this stuff, that are operationally working in this all day, every day. They're the ones that need to give that input and have the opportunity to feedback on the processes. But the worst one is at the bottom here. Yeah, we've got this great process diagram, but that's not actually what happens. Yeah, that's what nobody actually does that. We've just got it as a piece of paper. You know, and that's again something that is a very common scenario. So all of these from the slide that we've just seen, we think are aligned to the signs that process culture is weak and needs improvement. You know, these together with a process manual that maybe you have to read down to page 16 to actually get to what you're looking for are the root cause of weak process culture. And I really like the story of a group of blind people that were invited to touch an elephant to see what it was like. And each person feels a different part. One person touches the side, one person touches the leg, one person touches the trunk and the tusk. And they all get back together and compare notes. And they're in complete disarray and disagreement as to what an elephant actually is. And that's pretty much like what process mapping can be when you haven't got an aligned way and you've got a poor process culture. On top of that, there's often the danger that there's a bit of an apathy that can generate around processes, because if we're not careful, because it's been seen historically as such a kind of specialist activity, people think, oh no, processes are just complicated things over there. You know, that's a key, I don't deal with that. That's done by a separate team. You know, and so it becomes something that doesn't engage everybody, and we end up with all of the challenges I'm talking about. And in the modern world of mobile phones, of apps, you know, we're experiencing a huge growth in complex information that's fed to us in an ever more graphical, visual, and easy to read format. But yet, as organizations, we're still quite happy to give process maps like this to our employees and expect them to be able to use it, to read it, to induct stuff with it. You know, these are created typically by technical specialists. They're almost universally ignored, as we were saying. You know, they're out of date, they're complicated, which is never great. You know, it's just a really difficult part of that process. It quashes innovation, it quashes that whole feedback loop. You know, people's natural state is that they want to contribute, they want to innovate and try things. And so we need to be able to build that in our process culture. And I think there's, from a consultant's point of view, also a real danger that, you know, the idea here that there are domain experts that can help you become a great process organization is, you know, a very difficult one. There's a big difference between we can only improve with the help of experts and, you know, the help of experts coming in temporarily to get us up to speed with the right tooling. You know, there's a really fine line there. So why do we want to develop a process center of excellence? Why build this culture of continuous development? Well, imagine if you could search for any and access any process in your organization in one click from perhaps your company intranet homepage. Again, something that many customers are looking to do. And when it opens, the process is visually so clear and easy to follow and understand that in 10 minutes you've got a complete view of the whole thing end to end. Imagine how great that would also be for any new starters coming into a role, to get that kind of visibility of everything that they're doing. By mapping our processes in that way, we're creating this kind of central hub for a single source of truth when it comes to process. And this one central process design is shared by everybody and aligns across all these roles and departments. And the ease of use and the visibility combined with the feedback is what's driving that critical engagement. And this benefits, the benefits of doing this are stretching way beyond just having those process maps. One of the most beneficial outcomes that we see from process mapping is the insight that it gives us in prioritizing the processes that should be focused on for automation. Through mapping a current as-is process, we can not only contrast kind of well-developed and optimized process design, but we can align the process activities to the roles that are taking part in that process. And that can give us a cost cycle. And it means that we can say every time this process gets triggered, it's costing us £450. And we're doing this 1,000 times a year. We're suddenly starting to get some really impactful cost analysis. So two really main benefits here. One is that we can prioritize the automation of the processes to make sure we're getting the most return, but it also means that we're not wasting a whole load of resources and energy on automating things which have really not yet been properly fully documented or defined. And so with that, the automation piece, if I can get these to see. Great, so that leads us really nicely into what makes up the anatomy of an automation solution. And here we're going to start to look through intelligent forms, workflow, robotic process automation, document generation, and electronic signatures. I'm just going to touch on each of these in turn. Because whether it's capturing data to trigger a process, or whether it's through things like a request that's being made, like booking leave, claiming expenses, forms play a really vital role in the automation landscape when we're digitizing stuff. But we also rely on forms for key steps in the workflow too, things like detailed approvals, where we need approvals to see an overview of what we're actually approving, or inspection reports that need to gather really detailed information or auditable information. Things that need to be really carefully controlled on data capture, but also modern automation solutions, the forms need to be really fully mobile enabled as well, because we need to do a lot of this from the field, and they need to behave more intelligently, more like apps do. And so we need them to respond dynamically to the data that we're putting into the form. And so sections maybe are being changed around or hidden, or different fields or options are swapping out. And a great example of this is one of our customers, the AA, the Automobile Association, have been replacing thousands of paper forms which were in their vans and patrols. And one of them was a field that had 184 fields on the paper form for the van drivers. And it was something that, from a digital form point of view, was reduced to just 20 fields. That, as you started to fill the form in, guided the user intelligently through the information that was relevant to that scenario, depending on whether it was an accident or an environmental hazard and so on. So the forms need to be able to look up data from our systems of record and be fed information, maybe on launch, that determines how they're going to appear as well, and dynamically localizing to things like address formats and phone numbers and all of these things that we need them to do. Modern intelligent forms, it's typically these intricacies that have kind of driven this whole thing down more of a technical route historically, but today's modern low-code, no-code technologies make all of this possible and mean that we can deliver this capability to business users. The workflow tools then, once we've captured that information, allow us to really easily define and digitize these processes and use that form data to drive the workflows. Things like automated messages, notifications, and tasks all need to interact seamlessly with teams wherever they are, and working that through the communication layers that we use every day, whether that's email, Teams, Slack, or whatever environment we're in. So intuitive process design tools and ease of use feel like pretty obvious requirements for this. But historically, the building blocks, whilst they have been quite graphical, the power behind the scenes requires a lot of technical experience, and often has driven us towards things like coding skills being needed. And so the design canvas should not only allow us to conceptualize and visualize our business processes, but also to be able to test and iterate them in that design directly. That's pretty key. Other than the most really simple examples of workflows, most workflows are rarely linear and straightforward. They rely on pretty complex logic. They're controlling things like the state and how the workflow moves around. If we think of things like an employee appraisal, we've got input that's coming from multiple colleagues. It might bounce between several different people. It might bounce between the manager and the employee several times before something is finalized. And it's that kind of interaction that we're talking about. So the workflows need to be able to run wherever we need them. They need to be able to run on cloud, on premise. They need seamless integration with our core systems. We need to be able to integrate those systems and connect to APIs. Often it's this last piece, the whole integration piece, that for a lot of people, again, is a stumbling block because it becomes a big technical barrier in the workflow. So we can do so much in terms of the basic automation, the emails, the tasks, all that stuff's great. But actually, when we get to the nitty-gritty of really making it talk to systems, often that's the bit that's harder. And aligned to the digital automation, robotic process automation, or RPA, is another really powerful feature in this automation armory. RPA bots can help us to quickly and easily fulfill routine tasks that would be perhaps done by manual data capture or manual data input from people. So bots can perform these really repetitive tasks super fast at a much more rapid pace than we can, and avoid the risk particularly of human data entry errors. So in some ways, these tools are pretty much a necessary stopgap at the moment. They're helping us to automate the gap between the on-premise environments and cloud environments, or perhaps enabling processes that connect into legacy systems where we may not have APIs that digital workflow can reach. So RPA has been around for many years, but what's making these tools quite interesting in today's automation landscape is that traditionally they've needed really deep technical skills and therefore have been a pretty high cost. What we're seeing in today's graphical RPA designers is that they're structured in a way that we can provide them to a much wider audience. They're again very graphically led technologies, and it allows for structured and unstructured data to be fed into the bots that we're looking to build, and that creates some really powerful scenarios. Further, really common interaction for our workflow landscape is documents. Just think about how frequently processes either interact with a document, like sending out various attachments, or more importantly, creating a document through the process of the workflow and capturing the data that's going into the workflow. Things like contracts, offers of employment, things like inspection reports or technical documentation. In so many cases, these two elements are disjointed and they're pretty manual. Often, the process will run and the outputs of the process will be taken, and somebody will manually update the template with all that detail. Well, a fully automated modern solution should enable us to bring multiple templates together and populate all of that, not just text, but things like tables, imagery, data into those documents dynamically as well. And the workflow tools need to be able to interact with our content layer where we're holding all this information, whether that's SharePoint, Box, or whatever other content tools we're using, and make sure that things like the security, the governance, the classification is applied as part of that workflow process. One of the water companies that we're working with save thousands of hours automating their flood investigation reporting. They've got an obligation to report to the Environment Agency, and depending on the nature and the extent of the escape, the documentation and the investigation might take different routes, and they're using document generation to build really highly complex reports in multiple stages, and the workflow has taken so much of the manual effort out of generating those documents. And of course, where there are documents, there are signatures. And over the past 18 months, I guess inevitably, we've seen a huge increase in customers looking for workflow solutions to enable the capture of e-signatures on contracts, on sales orders, all sorts of documents internally and externally. So one of the final key components in the automation armory that we're going to look at here is the consideration of the role that e-signatures play. And so we often want to compile multiple documents into an envelope. and send that envelope for signature. There might be multiple approvers of that envelope, so it needs to go through many stages. And we need to control whether that's happening in parallel or whether it's needed in sequence, and the appropriate routing of that. It's also important that we've got things like reminders and escalations, making sure stuff's not in danger of falling into gaps. But the power of combining e-signature capability with document generation and the workflow tools that we've looked through deliver really highly developed automated solutions. And so as we're here today in Edinburgh, I thought it would be appropriate to highlight that each of these components has been instrumental in helping customers to digitise and automate many of their high priority processes, none more so than Scottish Fire and Rescue. So SFRS are actually the world's 4th largest fire and rescue service in the world. They've got 8,000 staff that serve the whole of Scotland, including some of the most remote and rural communities. And the team at Synergi has been working alongside SFRS for several years, and the service was created from the merger of 8 regional services. And in many of the areas, these are retained duty crews, and the manual processing of payroll data was a huge challenge and relied on a lot of complex spreadsheet manipulation between all the different areas. And so using the platform and the workflow technologies, we've been able to help with fully digitising this whole end-to-end process. We're accurately capturing all the time data on mobile, and all the advanced workflow is doing the appropriate routing approval and calculations behind the scenes. Cool. So having thought about the automation components, I just want to very briefly touch on some further important aspects of the tooling around. We've talked about the fact that historically a lot of these technologies have had a very technical focus. Lots of rules, logic, and things that have been pretty demanding from a technical standpoint, but the landscape's rapidly changing. It's taken quite a lot of time, but the modern workflow and automation tools are opening up real opportunity for business users and process champions to not just define their processes, but actually to build and maintain them using the no-code technologies. The term citizen developer has been around for quite a long time, but enabling business users to take the lead and take this role in defining and designing these applications and solutions. Again, I mentioned the Automobile Association, the AA, earlier on. Great example of how their different teams across their signage groups, their insurance units, their patrol and breakdown services, all of those business users have been able to take their own processes and develop forms and workflows that have managed those areas. Yes, it's been under the umbrella guidance of their IT team, but it's actually been made really, really effective by the fact that it's throughout the organisation. And that adoption model, I think, really reflects, the modern capabilities. As I said earlier, our role as technology partners evolving much more into mentoring, support, and enablement. And that's really a key successful ingredient to the successful long-term adoption of these technologies. Cool. So with all of these processes now successfully mapped and automated, the challenge starts to shift more towards visibility. How many times is this process running? Who's running it most frequently? Is it getting stuck somewhere? How much is that costing us? What can we do to optimize the process design and performance? We need to capture a lot of information to do this, to give us that real insight into the health and the performance of the process tools. But it's a real opportunity to be able to build out these optimizations and get these ideas fed back directly and close that life cycle, because if we can get that visibility of how the process is running, we can come up with the optimizations to feed back into the process design and ultimately create that whole loop that we were introducing earlier on. And in order for that to be successful, we need a number of things to come together in the organisation: vision, skills, incentive, resources, and an action plan. But if any one of these is missing, then we're going to really struggle to do that and realise those benefits. So finally, we're going to be looking at how we can orchestrate all of this and bring it all together. There's certainly a really wide, varied landscape of automation tools out there, without question. But one of the reasons why Synergi works so closely with Nintex is the maturity and the breadth of their process platform and the ability that they have to orchestrate all of this and bring it into the Nintex process cloud. So they've got a really powerful suite of integrated tools that stretch right away from the process mapping and design through the digital automation and right across to the right-hand side here on the automation piece. And just to wrap things up, I'll very quickly step through those. I have got my machine. I am really happy to show you through any demonstrations or walk through any of the platform with you on the Nintex stand as we walk through. But the process mapping and design tool that we're seeing is Nintex ProMap. We'll have a quick run through here. Now, ProMap has, with the wider platforms, been recognised largely by Forrester, Gartner, I go to many of the other analysts as being an industry leader, particularly for the breadth and depth of offering. And ProMap itself has been adopted by organisations like McDonald's, Coke, Toyota, Audi, and lots of global brands that use it to develop a centre of excellence. I'm actually working on a couple of ProMap deployments currently at the moment. One of them is up here in Scotland with an energy company, and it's the simplicity and the ease of use that's driving the alignment with these organisations to really get that process culture going. And it does an amazing job of communicating these live and dynamic processes and enabling participants to engage in that feedback. It takes a lot of the legwork not only out of that whole communication layer, but it also gives us, from an accountability and an audit trail point of view, something that auditors really, they light up when they see what goes into ProMap, because it gives you all of the detail around not only things like the documentation, the risks that are involved in the process, all of the surrounding aspects that actually make that a living, breathing thing in the organisation. It means that we can finally get beyond this restriction of having static process maps, and it means that we can integrate it into our workflow platforms because it's all part of that one layer. When it comes to that automation layer, the drag and drop design of Nintex workflow, the way that the interface works, is something that we've been particularly impressed with. How features like the rules and the complex logic can be built into the workflow designs using these graphical controls and not having to drop back to code all of the time. It's been a huge step change in that. Workflows can be very easily connected to business systems and data, and the workflow designer is able to orchestrate this across all of the process mapping, across the RPA, across document generation, across e-signatures. So it does an amazing job with that. And similarly, that's very much true of the form designer. The forms designer is similarly a very graphical drag and drop tool where we can again apply the rules and the logic and the controls in a similarly highly graphical way. One of the really powerful pieces with Nintex, though, we talked about the barrier to getting to systems and applications and the API layer. Nintex extensions enable us to build connections into every system that we have and enable them to be dragged just graphically into workflows. And so it means that people building and managing those workflows don't have to worry about that level of complexity. And it's a great solution to that whole integration challenge. The document generation tool that's again built directly into the workflow is a really powerful action. It allows us to take multiple templates, in fact up to 50 templates, and bring them together conditionally based on different scenarios to compile the type of documentation that we need. And so a really powerful document tagger enables us to work right away across all of the Microsoft suite, so whether it's in Excel, Word, PowerPoint, to automatically generate those documentation pieces that we need and compile them. As I say, it can include things like data, imagery, tables, all sorts of other information. And so e-signs like the Robin to the document generation's Batman, the two really go hand in hand. You see them together all the time. But the Nintex sign workflow actions really give us the ability to have multiple signatories, to do things like reminders and integrate this piece directly into getting signed documents for the business applications. So very finally, the analytics layer. Nintex have got a brand new visualization platform in Nintex Analytics. And this connects across the whole environment. It gives us the ability to not only monitor everything that's going on in that workflow landscape, like where a workflow is running, which departments are running these areas the most, but also within a process, we can just place what we call beacons that allow us to measure and monitor either points in time or individual sections of a workflow and bring those metrics dynamically through into live dashboards. So we can start to see in real time exactly what's happening in those processes, exactly where those blockages are. So that was just a really quick sort of whistle-stop tour through the platform. As I say, I'm really happy to show much more of this to any of you if you're interested in that in the live event. Appreciate we've also got colleagues who are joining us on the virtual event, and obviously be really happy to get my colleagues on the booth there to do that as well. Finally, question back is, how ready are you yourselves? If you're interested in finding out more about this, you can either scan this code on here, and I think it's dotted on the seats. We've got it up on the booth as well. But this will take you through to a very quick couple of minute survey, which will help just to give you some background. In fact, if you feed this, it is a Nintex form, you won't be surprised to know. And it will send you back through document generation, a whole pack of information that will be a bit of guidance around where things are currently with your own processes, and some links to some resources that might be useful for taking things a bit further. So at that stage, are there any questions from what we've talked through? Okay. Don't know if I was going to ask Ben if there were questions from the virtual audience, but he's not here.
I'm using the platform.
Okay.
There's no question.
Okay, brilliant. Fantastic. Well, in that case, thank you very much indeed for your attention today, and pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
In terms of e-signatures, how do you do the verification piece for the persons provided the signature that we are in the actual area?
Yeah, so it's a good question. A lot of the e-signatures there are different levels of legal advice that are needed behind it. And so